Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a privilege for me to be before this audience, live from Trivandrum, Loyola College of Social Sciences. Greetings from Loyola. And I would, at this outset, take this occasion to acknowledge and also thank the organizers, especially Dr. D. Paul Davarin, a very paternal figure to me. And I would remember on this occasion Dr. Ilango Punuswamy, my own mentor, I would say a great inspiration for me. I should acknowledge the presence of the Social Work Department for having introduced me to this wonderful college with a history dating back to 1864 and with the kind of involvement they have had with the cause for the society. And I have to thank the Dean and IQAC coordinator, Sri Suresh Frederick, for having invited me to this very specific program titled the Benchmarking in Best Practices in Teaching, Learning and Higher Education. Now, at the outset, I would say that this presentation or this transmission to you is purely autobiographical because I perhaps would like to talk to you from my point of view, from my experiences in being a part of the IQAC. More than that, my experiences in being a teacher and a mentor with the students. And I would at the outset say that I would not claim that this is going to be said or going to be advertised as a best practice, because I would say there is nothing called a best practice in my perspective. There are only perhaps what I would say with a lot of humility, something what I call good practices and not best practices. Good practices because I always say there is a scope for improvement. There's no superlative in any phase in life. There's always change happening. So with that outset, at the outset, I must stress that in this presentation, I'm only going to present the good practices that we have been practicing over the years, maybe since I joined my institution, Loyola College of Social Sciences. And when you talk about good practices, conceptually, I see it as an approach, a process, or a methodology that is basically ethical, number one. It must be fair and replicable. Yeah, it has to be replicated elsewhere, and that is my intention of doing this presentation. And this method or this process or this approach needs to be proven in the sense that it achieves the objectives it originally had been started for, and it could be recommended as a model for future practice. And in this presentation today, as I do it, I will be focusing on three different areas, because for me, it is teaching, learning, and evaluation. Teaching, learning doesn't go by itself. I would combine that in the context of the NAAC parameters as teaching, learning, and evaluation, and also curriculum and pedagogy. So my coverage of this entire topic would be structured in such a way that we will take a look at the curriculum that we have been developing and how we have developed that is one question. Second is in terms of the teaching, learning practices and the different approaches we have included there. And finally, as a component or subcomponent of teaching learning, we look at evaluation. As said, started the introduction. In this particular presentation, we will go in three major domains. The first being curriculum and pedagogy, the second being teaching learning, and the third being evaluations. Now, coming to the understanding of what these three aspects are, I will first rather differentiate between the curricular as well as the pedagogical aspects for conceptual clarity. And in my understanding, I feel that the curricular aspects basically talk about what is being transacted. It describes more in terms of the content of what is being done, what has to be dealt in, so that the learning objectives are achieved. Now, the second aspect that we would consider is the pedagogy, which is with regard to how the content is being transacted. So that includes the teacher-student or the teacher-learner interactions, the designing of the learning environment, and also giving them the ambience and the kind of learning tasks to be included in that transaction. Coming to the curricular designing, I think when we discuss the first aspect being curricular aspects, I think we have taken immense pain and care to include our stakeholders, especially the employers and the fieldwork agencies we have been interacted with. And more specifically, I think I must emphasize this, and during all of these workshops that we have conducted back in 2017 and 2013, we have included the alumni, those who have been on our campus, and know those who are working in the field. And for that manner, in that manner, they've been able to give us a lot of feedback as to what should have been included, what they're missing out in reality when they go into the real world. And so, in this context, we were able to move ahead with a couple of new themes. For example, we have included project planning and the course SW231. And as part of social work methods, which we have in course SW214, working with groups or group work, we have included life skill education. Now, why this particular logic? We have been experienced over the years that we have this methodology of transacting, working with groups or group work. We start with the intake, and then you design the assess for the group for the needs, you design the objectives, and then based on that you have activities. But the question always that arose over the years was that what do we give to them in terms of content? So now we have a tool, because we have been doing since 2013, we have been interacting with a lot of experts, and we ourselves have taken up training programs in life skill education. We make our students equipped. We equipped as a part of social group work, or in general terms, we had workshops which have life skill education being imparted to the students. So the major component of these life skills are taken to the field. You start with, for example, self-awareness. We talk about communication. We talk about handling emotions. We talk about problem solving, decision making, and all those aspects. So these aspects are basically introduced to the students. And when they go to the groups, this particular component becomes imperative. And so we made this a part of the curriculum when we designed life skill education. Similarly, over the years, we find a lot of interest in terms of engaging with communities, because social work, again, as a part of the curriculum, engages with communities. And we became aware that once we start working with communities, we need to not just empower them, but we need to give them solutions as to how to handle their problems. And as a part of that, we introduced a new theme called social entrepreneurship. But before that, we had an international conference on it was at that time called social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And it was in association with James Cook University. From those experiences we had a discussion with experts, we eventually designed a module, a component of paper course SW241, and wherein which we, just like in project planning, we give them systematic approach in designing socially relevant and sustainable projects. And as a subcomponent, we also included ecological social work, because we became aware of, once we started to interact in the arena of CSR, corporate social responsibility, that there was a lot of political aspects or socio-political aspects involved when people demand projects. So we need to look and perhaps make them aware about how much a project can affect in terms of social impact on the community. So ecological social work was another component of that particular paper. Similarly, as part of community health, we realized that increasingly we seem to be forgetting the indigenous systems of medicine. And we had a conference in 2009. We actually replicated a lot of those programs. We brought in experts from different fields of indigenous medicine. We had an expert in herbs. We had an expert in snake poison, whom we call Vishahari, who had come in. And then we also had laughter therapy. So we look at different alternatives. So the participants had brought in their own experiences. It was more of an interactive workshop. And as an outcome of that, when we modified our syllabus in 2013, we had included alternative systems of medicine as part of paper SW232, which we call Community Health and Healthcare Administration. Coming to the pedagogy, which I think is a very significant component. As I told you earlier, pedagogy is about how you transact the curriculum. Now, talking about the pedagogy, as I was explaining, pedagogy is definitely about how to transact the content. And in our context of students, we basically went until around 2006, we went by what we call the PI approach, which was about planning, implementation, and evaluation. So it was just as in the case of the project management mode, we had planning, implementation, evaluation. But post 2006, there was a thinking about the importance of monitoring to be included. So as part of every pedagogical transaction, for every activity undertaken, by each department, whether it be a conference, whether it be a seminar, whether it be a celebration, or whether it be an external program in terms of going out to the community and coming back. The entire thing was planned, and as per the plan, it was implemented and finally evaluated. But post 2006, we included the next component being monitoring. So it became PIME, P-I-M-E, Planning, Implementation, Monitoring, and Evaluation. Now we treat each department as a microsystem in which they generate their own data, and that is taken to the entire process of planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, at the end of which we generate documentation, and the documentation is passed on through the staff council, to the department staff council, to the staff council, which is the college council, and handed over to for the NAC for its documentation. Now, what are the advantages of such an approach? Number one is that we have a project lifecycle approach, and there is this very important aspect, which I think is very important in education, where we have practice followed by reflection. So we have this praxis reflection happening all the time. And that in itself make the students more analytical and then more onto the things that they do. They think and review before they get into action, and even after they come out of it. So there's a learning that happens after that. But the challenges here is that there is voluminous amount of work to be done and documentation to be done, and then we also need to be sure that there is a feedback that comes from each activity that happens. But again, the problem I think would be the amount of data being generated, the amount of time being spent on doing this particular activity. That's a huge challenge. And having generated so much of documentation, how to extract, how to data mine becomes a big challenge. The next component that we perhaps need to be looking at is the specific pedagogy, which I think we will revisit later if necessary. For me, social work, or in general, any sort of social science or humanities, must be about practice. Whichever field you're involved in, there must be a component, the focal component must be practicals, to do things. In our case, we have the fortune of going out to the communities. We have the experience of meeting clients individually or even groups as a student engaged in communities. Now, out of this practice, and other examples we will talk about later, out of this practice, we generate documents, as I mentioned earlier. There is documentation being done, which I call poiesis. Poiesis is a Greek term which hints at production. So from the practice, we produce documentation, which is a sign of production. And this produce, or the products, are put out to a general audience by way of seminars. So we have what we call dissemination happening, which is otherwise known as seminaria. So seeding out what we have learned, getting the others to evaluate it, and then give us a feedback. And this becomes ultimately the theory, as we find here, being noted in the knowledge area. So theory is the ultimate output from it. As a follow-up to the diagram that we mentioned and see the 4 quadrants, we are talking specifically about praxis, which is practice. Listed on your screen, you can find about numerous instances of academic research, about engagement in the field, about live projects. I will probably elaborate on a few. Capacity building, which the students are involved in, student activism, awareness generation programs in the form of street theatre, and then research and consultancy. So these are the area of actual field practice that the students get involved in. For example, when we had the disaster in Kerala, between August 17th and September 5th, actually it coincided with Onam, and the government had declared holidays on 17th of August, following which the students actually went into the field. They were actually volunteered to take up the activities. So they went into that, they recruited about 6,000 volunteers, they themselves got involved, they distributed themselves into the 14 districts, and they also provided training with us in association with NIMHANS. So that was a field activity. Now, at the end of it, what happened? At the end of it, we actually collected data, we sat down together, we started to write papers together. For example, some of them wrote about their real experiences of what actually happened, the entire project. The entire disaster management process was recorded in one particular case. In another presentation by one of the alumni, he went out and studied what was the transformation that the volunteers went through, being participants of this disaster management activity, working in collection centers. Another girl, Anita, worked on her area of interest for Anita was working with fishermen. And for her, because they were the major intervention that actually happened. Why we saved so many lives was because of the fishermen intervention. So her focus was on what were their experiences going through it, made them venture into it, how did they come out of it, and what are the retrospective feelings about the entire process. Likewise, they had data being generated. This was presented in different conferences. We have been to at least 5 conferences, about 7 presentations so far. And beyond that, we are probably writing a book on it. So there is indigenous literature being also generated. That way, I'm saying this: the focus becomes practice. We had live projects in terms of involvement with the district mental health program, where they went out and brought in the patients who are relapsing back into the treatment mode. We had interventions in Kotur where a group of our students involved with the Department of Women and Child Welfare under the Social Justice Department, they actually stayed out in those environments over the weekends. They went to the field on Fridays, they stayed on till Sundays. And what they did was basically follow up on students who are dropouts from the tribal schools. And as an outcome of that, I guess, in the case of DMHP or in the case of Kotur, they were able to actually convince the authorities. In the case of Kotur, which is actually a tribal colony, they were managed to get the attention of the district collector, and she, Ms. Dr. Vasuki, she was directly involved. She summoned all the, I think, 17 departments: revenue, health, electricity, transport, and a lot of those departments were involved, and immediate action was taken based on the suggestion of the students. So you find your practice being, emulated or really taken forward. We had experiments with social entrepreneurship where they did actual programs on campus, and so this is about the entire practice. All the things that we learn in the text is actually practice first, and that is related to the textbooks that we talk about. And as I was telling you, again, following the action component, we had generated reports, we had written chapters in books. For example, from DMHP, we had written in Sage about how the linkages work, how does voluntaryship help to make mental health care or community mental health much more effective. We also talked about how we were able to provide external resources in terms of volunteers. There were reports generated in activities which I'll detail later, like for instance, Safety Pin, which was about women's safety, the Careless State Transport project we had generated. The students were involved in those activities, and they themselves also helped us write up these reports, especially those search scholars. We did a study for, there was this instance also where we had involved with the DMHP, and from which we had actually generated chapters in books. We had involved with the Safety Pin, which was also focus on women's safety. So they went out to the field, they used mobile applications. One particular application here in this case was Safety Pin, in which they loaded all their smartphones, they went to the field, they documented evidences regarding lighting, safety in terms of the pavements, in terms of road crossings, in terms of the pedestrian walking, in terms of availability of security, in terms of watchmen or policemen at junctions. So everything concerning women's safety was looked into, the kind of lighting, etc., everything. So that was eventually turned out as a report, as is mentioned here, the Safety Pin report. And then we also had done documentation regarding studies on the youth of Kerala. What are the aspirations? It was called the Voices of Youth. We were also commissioned by the Women and Child Welfare Department to do a study on how the Domestic Violence Act played out. And there was a review regarding that. So we did create documents which was handed over to the government. We also had a significant role in actually shaping up the curriculum, first at the +2 level. It was, I would remember at this point, Mr. Devasiya, who was significantly the person who drove social work education at the +2 level as part of humanities. We were actually partners in creating their curriculum in terms of designing textbooks. At the time, there was no textbooks, so that becomes indigenous material. We also had been, as we always do, part of the board of studies for BSW programs and revamping it only recently. We also had done several revisions, and this becomes actually a good document for social work education. We also have done numerous research articles in various journals on issues or topics, themes ranging from gender, to aging, to social entrepreneurship, life skill, education, suicide prevention, HIV. So there is an amount of documentation being done, enormous amount of documentation being done. So what we're looking at is this quadrant. So we have looked at praxis, we have looked at poiesis. Now we come to the next dimension of the pedagogy, which is actually to transfer, to communicate what we have learned. Through our engagements in various activities, we had created documents. Now the question is, our work, is our kind of work, when it is put down into the frame of research methodology, or for that matter, or the form of an article, is it acceptable to others? So we do presentations in terms of conferences. We have created materials for books with the specific intention of being reviewed, with the specific intention of being cross-checked to see whether it really stands the rigor of empirical evidence. So we send it with all aplomb to peer-reviewed journals. We present it at workshops. We take it up at conferences and seminars, and also turn in books. So that is the whole idea behind dissemination. Seminaria, giving it out information. And so having cross-checked that, maybe over a period of time, I remember when I took up life skill training, I took it up first as a training program with Disha, which was actually done in 2011. And from that experience that we did together, I put in a better module. And having done that module, we tried it out with a group. And that module having done, we measured the changes in terms of self-esteem. So this particular information or this experience was put into articles, which was presented at conferences in Nepal, which was called the International Conclave on Social Work Intervention. And from there, we took it further to 2 other conferences on our campus. We had 3 training workshops, which was disseminated to the people around. So that way we are transferring information. And it gets vetted over a period of time to become a theory, a content that is really grounded. So that is with regard to the element of theoria. So the 4th dimension of the quadrant of the pedagogy being satisfied. Now, so far we have been looking at the pedagogy and the curriculum. Now what we're going to discuss is the kind of transaction that we do with the learners. And for this, we need to look at the various systems that we use. One of the systems that we put into practice is the multi-feedback system, a multimedia feedback system, because this incorporates a number of mediums in terms of what we do for communication. We use a camera, we use a laptop in order to record what was put into a camera, and that is presented by way of an LCD projector. Now, what do we look at? This particular exercise is put down in the context of a seminar presentation. So in our campus, obviously, because of the semester system, each student is expected to present one seminar, and the seminar becomes the basis for a significant internal evaluation. To make it more rigorous and more substantial, we use this particular system. So the presentation is recorded and it's played back to the audience. And what the learner does is he or she will position their benchmark in terms of eye contact, the body language aspects, the facial expression, the voice modulation, the fluency, timing, the content, as well as the communication enhancements they have done in terms of the presentation. Now, the first level of evaluation is asking the presenter to reflect on his or her presentation. And having done that, the next step is asking the observers, the other learners in the class, to give them a feedback. I found it very interesting that in most of the occasions, it's often a very positive experience because the learner who presents is often defensive and quite critical about himself or herself. But the observers often come up with a lot of support, and the final evaluation being done by the summary being done by the teacher. And having done that, basically, I would show you in the next slide. The outcome is that first the person is doubtful. He or she asks, "Is it okay?" And having looked at the presentation, you get a feedback from 2 sources, and then the person realizes there's some sort of insight development there. At the end of which, you also decide on what more you need to improve, and you set your own benchmarks and then work on it. So when you graduate from the first to the second semester, there is this decision regarding your benchmarks for the next presentation. So this is about the MFS, and I think substantially this has helped is to help the individual to reflect on his or her presentation. And I'm suggesting that this becomes now a lot more easier considering the fact that we have smartphones. They can do it on their own personal mobiles and do a reflection. and even doing it in small groups will be a fine exercise. The same thing can be effectively done in terms of teaching counseling, especially, or for that matter, any personal skills. The second very significant intervention is mentoring in our campus, and I think this is something substantially that we give a lot of importance to. Each teacher, for that matter, is assigned a group of 10 to 15 students. During the first semester, as they come in, they are not given options. They're assigned, each teacher is assigned 5 of the students. It's only during the second and third semesters that get an option to select to choose their own teachers or mentors. At times, we also give them an option of selecting a teacher from another department. It's up to them. So that is one major activity that we do undertake ritualistically, and it takes a lot of time for that matter. We also ask them at the end of each semester to prepare semester transcripts, which includes data regarding all the work they have done, the fieldwork hours, the presentations they have done, the kind of activities their extracurricular and curricular activities are involved. Because this becomes particularly important in the case of international students who plan to migrate out of India, especially to the US or Canada or New Zealand. So we do have segments of transcript preparation which we have code transformed. So this is transferred electronically to the teachers, respective teachers, and is consolidated at the end of the course. Now this particular activity has been able to help us guide, and I guess I would use the word make a significant difference to the life of many. We could cite instances of the names listed here are Pencil. These are different initiatives run by different. We have very significant stories to tell you about, but I would probably cite only 3. The story of Pencil, Navam, and EcoLife. Pencil, to begin with, was an initiative by a student from the batch of 2009. She took to life skill training and wanted to do something on her own. So we basically, I told you about our experiment in 2011. There was a constant engagement with life skill training. She eventually started on her own trust, and then started to go to schools and colleges in the central Travancore, or rather Trivella area, Changanur area. And that grew over a few years. And lately I come to know that she's very much engaged with storytelling as a new way of teaching children value education. So she designs modules or stories in a studio, tells a story, and then probably gets the children to work on in terms of workbooks. So that's the latest project that she's coming out with. Navam is another story of my personal growth too. We had in 2015 a very startling event where one of our students who turned up wanted to do nothing but dance. So when my vice principal, Father Ranjit, told me that you have a dancer in your class, I was kind of shocked. I would not say shocked, but challenged, really challenged. I did not really know what to do. But over the semesters, we started to talk to each other, and I could realize that she was focused at every point on dance. So we did it in terms of psychology. What would be the psychological implications of dance? What the advantages? She went on to do that with every other subject. And finally, when she came to her dissertation, she did it specifically on a tribal dance called Vatakali. And subsequent to that, she was quite decided that she went beyond that, and then she did a course in dance movement therapy, because we also had organized in the meanwhile international conference on social entrepreneurship, and we managed to meet people who were talking about different options. And coincidentally also we had a workshop on expressive art therapies, during which we had brought in Spanish dancer. So that was the beginning, the meeting with him. And all of this together finally gave her the confidence to take up dance movement therapy. And just about a week back, she's launched her own NGO, which is Navam. And what she promises to provide is a space, a natural space for you to express anything that you want to express, your feelings, your thought, your emotions, everything. And a very lovely name she has given to it, Navam, which stands for nature, trees, and also water. And all these things are very organic, a concept. So we went to the inauguration last week. There was also another venture after the international conference on social innovation and social entrepreneurship. A few of us during our journey to Delhi came at Goonj, and we thought, okay, Goonj has a way. Goonj is a very happening NGO in Delhi and spreading with its activities all over India. They are the people who actually probably drove the Dhan Utsav, and we were participating in that too. Now, what was the concept is here that we realized that there was a lot of materials that all of us have that we do not need. So there's this material that is stashed away, but it's of no use to us. So why not tap that? So there is urban abundance. Why don't we tap on those urban abundance? So that was the first idea, was to basically get those materials out and resell those materials. And this wonderful exercise grew about, there was a lot of conceptual discussions. It in the end did not take off because there was a lot of diverse opinions. I think there were too many people with a lot of wonderful ideas competing for space within this particular concept. But in all, this was a great exercise because we had at least three of them finding their own ways. One in specifically was a girl who refused to travel, and getting her to venture out into selling things, in the sense she was made to travel to get ethnic materials from out of the state, and with her friend she finally did travel out to Gujarat. She did